Board of Education on September 9th at 7:10 p.m. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. DeVera?
Here.
Mrs. McGinley?
Here.
Mr. Jewett?
Here.
Mrs. Larson?
Here.
Miss Lee?
Here.
Mrs. Klingler?
Here.
Okay, we can all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okie dokie. I need a motion for the approval of the meeting agenda.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Ms. Lee, seconded by Ms. Klingler. Can I have a roll call?
Mr. DeVera?
Yep.
If Michael's not here, is he going to be able to do communication to the board A?
That's what your fearless vice president's for.
Then I so definitely say yes.
We good?
Yeah,
I'll go
roll
yes.
Mr. DeVera?
It's a yes for me.
Mrs. McGinley?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Oh, definitely.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Miss Lee?
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler?
Yes.
Motion carries. Okay, so bringing up item A, just a reminder to everyone that the IASB Lake Division Dinner is Wednesday, October 9th at 6:30, hosted by Libertyville School District 70 at Highland Middle School. Okay, moving on from that. We will be talking to Mr. Apgar, who will be presenting the findings of the special ed needs assessment.
Good evening. Thank you to Dr. Mendoza and the Board of Education for allowing us to come share the findings of the Special Education Needs Assessment. On February 26th of this year, the Board of Education approved a contract with the Catalyst for Educational Change to conduct a needs assessment of the district's special education program following notification of the district's school summative designations. The focus of this needs assessment was to enhance systems to improve the academic performance of students who receive special education services. The needs assessment was not necessarily an audit for compliance. So the findings shared this evening will focus on the process, the outcomes, and the recommendations related to the needs assessment. It's important to note that in the future, I will bring back actionable strategies that will be aligned with the recommendations that will be shared this evening. So throughout this process, it's been a pleasure to work with Ms. Shelley Taylor and Ms. Valerie Pena Hernandez to conduct this needs assessment. And at this time, I will turn the presentation over to Ms. Taylor.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Shelley Taylor. That was really nice. Thank you, Dr. Apgar. I got to get used to this microphone. Okay. So first off, let me just share a couple things. I know that your board docs do have the full slide deck as well as the full report. I have, you're welcome, streamlined the 20-some pages for tonight's presentation, but certainly will allow for you all to ask some questions. I'm going to go through a couple of the key pieces that are in the slides and then also refer to some of the page numbers. So especially if it's something that you want to make note, I will constantly be referring to page numbers within the formal document that has plenty of language that you could go back and refer to. Okay, so again, the purpose of the needs assessment, and one of the things I just want to name, the Catalyst for Educational Change, we're a nonprofit organization. We've been in the state of Illinois for over 38 years, started specifically around continuous improvement and working with school systems with the idea that in order to get to change with any of your initiatives, you are going to need all stakeholders working together. That includes board, administration, and teachers, and especially the teacher unions working together. We strongly believe in transparency and we strongly believe in voice. So our process is very much dedicated towards including a transparent and voice-driven process, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. But the purpose is here specifically to be looking at the successes and challenges within your current special education programming around service delivery, placement, and instructional practices. Again, as Dr. Apgar mentioned, this was not a compliance visit to determine whether or not IEPs are filled out correctly or not. So that was not the intention of what we were here to do. The other piece was really to also look at the overall climate and tone among all of your stakeholders as it relates to operationalizing the ideal special education programming, service delivery, and placement for your students with disabilities. The last thing, of course, is to provide recommendations for possible enhancements and future fund allocation considerations for your programming to really optimize your resources to really get positive results for your students. So that was really the purpose of why we were here. The process included these important pieces. As I mentioned, transparency is really so important in our process. So it started with an overview where we really made sure that all stakeholders who are going to be impacted by this were part of that, had an opportunity to understand what it is, and most especially, I'll tell you, what it's not. I find that when all of the leaders and all of the folks who are going to be asked to participate in things like a focus group have an understanding before they even agree to be a part of that, then they really are then strongly connected to and provide a richer data set for us to kind of get to the recommendations. Then we get into the data review. So specifically what pieces, and if you actually look, I'll get into that on page, I think it's 22, there's the different data sets that we did collect. So the back of the report does have all of those. Then we go into the focus groups where we actually collect then voice and perception. When we combine that triangulated set of data between reviewing IEPs, what your program says on paper, actually doing classroom walkthroughs and seeing what your programs look like in action, and then also then pairing that with the voice and the perceptions of the staff who are implementing those things. Between there, that's where we start to look for trend findings, and then those trends then lead into our recommendations. As I mentioned, pages 20 and 21 of the full report do have a full listing of all of the data sources that we did collect. And then the report itself is broken down into the trends and findings where we name successes and challenges that did come up in the work that we did. And then we do provide, in quite detail, 3 recommendations, which I'm going to get into in a minute in terms of those details. But I'm going to pause here just to kind of check. Any questions before I dive into the recommendations and the trend finding in terms of what we were doing, how we went about doing that, and any other pieces about the catalyst for educational change before I get into the details?
Is there a particular reason why you didn't also include an audit as well?
That was not, so an audit is the similar as a needs assessment. It really is the same thing. I think the question is compliance. So it's not an audit for compliance versus it is an audit for more programmatic pieces. So we didn't come in to necessarily dissect whether or not specific IEPs were filled out properly, which is more of something that maybe the state of Illinois might come in and do themselves to just kind of check on those pieces. We were here to come more look at the programmatic pieces.
But if they're not filled out appropriately, how can they be followed appropriately and therefore educate the children appropriately to get them to meet where they need to be?
Again, I think we did review IEPs in terms of how we're seeing the program in action. We did not really go in, because you could dive deep into some of those pieces, but that was not really what we were here to do. That would be a separate piece that ultimately, yes, it's important to have that there, but it's not necessarily why we were here to look at the purpose behind the programming and how to actually get more substantial outcomes for your students.
But don't the IEPs drive the programming?
They do. we're just not commenting and did not collect data to report like so many IEPs did not have these things. So that's not why we were there. But we did look at the IEPs in terms of how the programs were identified or how the students were placed into pieces, things that the IEP team did. So we did do that. And I guess maybe let me redefine compliance, because I think that's maybe the nuance here. So compliance in terms of dotting I's, crossing T's, versus what did IEP teams recommend? How is that placement working? We did look at it that way, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
So, Ms. Larson, that's a really good question. I would say historically we have not had like compliance findings where we've been out of compliance and had concerns, but this needs assessment really looked at the pieces that are important to us that will align with the school designations, like our programming, our instruction, the climate, and then sort of overall staff knowledge of placements and instruction and all of those pieces.
Thank you for the clarification.
So we did use what we saw within the IEPs because they were part of the data that we pulled to help inform in terms of some of our recommendations. And I'll make note to those when I get into that section. Thank you. Any other questions? All right, perfect. Okay, so there are several pages that really get into successes and challenges. I pulled out what I call my highlight reel. What are sort of the big key pieces that I wanted to present tonight, although there's certainly more that you could go through in a bullet point format. I'm going to start with successes, always a good place to start there. So first off is I'm honestly really thrilled to share this first bullet point, which is that you have a multi-tiered system of support process that is in place with a variety of placement options. I know this seems like, well, I will tell you that in many of these processes that I do, that is not the case. So something that I think this district should be very proud of is the fact that you do have MTSS working in your system. Maybe things aren't perfect, and I'm sure there's still lots of things that need to be supported within that programming, but it is a huge asset for the district. Now, why are we talking about that with special education? Well, I'll tell you because it starts with all kids are general ed kids first, and all kids do fall under that umbrella of MTSS, which of course then is really important in their programming when we also look at students with disabilities. So it is part of a really well-functioning special education program to have a strong MTSS system. So I just wanted to highlight that. That is a huge success for you. The other one is that your district does have, and I'm not saying this in a really sort of woo-woo kind of way, but the truth is that over all of the data, it was so clear to us that you have very hardworking, dedicated staff who go above and beyond daily. This was true especially when we did focus groups and we heard staff and actually all stakeholders mention that even when things were not quite working the way that they hoped they would, that the staff members would tirelessly take more time and effort to do something about that. So I think that that's a huge asset and something that we do bring in terms of your recommendations that you can play against. The next one is that some of your targeted smaller instructional settings that we observed provide super strong intervention support, and staff really report feeling impact being achieved in these. I will tell you that I do a lot of classroom walkthroughs, and you absolutely had a couple classrooms that when we walked through, Val and I mean, it was one of those, when you say jaw-dropping, truly, we were watching instruction, and both her and I looked at each other and went, like, wow, like that was an amazing lesson that we just saw. So there you really are some really bright spots that you have within your system. The other thing too is that your district and building faculty really have a good starting place for strong lines of communication. I think that's going to be important, especially when I get into some of the recommendations. And then the other one is that there's really already built a strong communication and relationships with families. I will tell you, your families that we spoke to really reported strong satisfaction in this area. So those were some of the highlight successes that I want to pull out. There's other ones in the report. Questions or any wonderings about that before I won't go into challenges? Okay, all right, so then moving on to those. So more guidance is still required to assist the IEP teams in understanding best program placement to ensure growth in some of the student deficit areas. So in terms of when those teams come together, when there isn't quite a shared understanding of placement or maybe where some of the placement options could be, that's where sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect. It's not because people are trying to do that, it's just there just needs to be a little more guidance around that. Students could also benefit from extended inclusionary practices, aka sometimes it's called mainstreaming, in general education settings as part of a more strategic movement of delivery across the various placements. Again, often that is an area where sometimes there's a hesitation to challenge or move some students into more challenging areas, which in fact sometimes create holding them back a little too much. There's also a need for more training, consistency, and accessibility to interventions across the pre-K-12 plus classrooms and utilization of instructional rigor. More is still required to support the learning needs of the duly identified, the DD label, which is developmental delay, or the SLD, which I know, sorry, it's alphabet soup here, but it's a specific learning disability eligible students. By the way, those are your largest special education population. In the report, I did do a breakdown where you can see how students are identified under which disability and where your highest percentages are. That's found in the report. So those are the ones that are your highest. And there is a need for shared vision and decision making with and among staff, with the largest fracture really between central office and buildings. Okay, questions or wonders around the challenges before I get to recommendations?
I do have a few questions. So I'm going to start with the first one where it says more guidance is required to assist IEP teams in understanding the best program placement. Is it that they're in a program already and maybe they should have been in a different one? Is that what we're saying here?
Yeah, and it depends across your buildings where some of the disjoint is, and it's more around when staff themselves have a preconceived understanding of a placement, and they might not think that that's the right placement, or they may not have the same understanding, or in fact, sometimes programs or placements have shifted over time, but not everybody understands that then maybe there's a little bit of a disconnect. So we heard some of that across various stakeholders.
So does that possibly connect with the need for the shared vision and decision between the central office and buildings? Because I see those two correlating.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, part of this is you all have a larger system, and we'll get into the communication as one of the recommendations that follow up on that. So the challenges are the basis for some of our recommendations, and you're hitting on that one, is that when folks don't have a full understanding and maybe over rely on past practice or things they once saw or information, I think then we're making decisions around things we don't know much about or we're not sure exist or exactly what it is, or we're making assumptions around that. And that's where I think that tighter understanding and correlation become. And yes, they do go hand in hand.
Okay.
Sorry, Mrs. Negretti-McGinley, I was going to share with you that we were in a building today, and it was evident that we needed to make a change in placement for a student. And with this first bullet point in mind, Laura Strange, who was in the room, brought up that we should get this teacher on a Teams call with the team from another building that would have been a more appropriate placement, so the team member at the building we were at could understand more of the placement, the needs of the students, how the classroom is structured, what instruction looks like. But with this first bullet point in mind, we began doing that today to make sure that staff members understood the program that students would be going into.
I mean, that's a good start, but, and I know there's still more presentation to go through, but obviously we need to make changes here. I'm not done, a few questions here on the challenges. So the next one, there's a need for more training, consistency, and accessibility, which you kind of just hit on there with the interventions. When you say more training is necessary, is it also again tied to that understanding of the programs for the students or what the student specifically needs?
Yeah, and it's it would be real specific. We'd have to get real specific. So I'm being global in this, but in general, there was a lot of data to pull this forward as a as a finding, because either staff may have reported not understanding or needing to have more training around specific interventions. And keep in mind that a child's IEP goals should be disability aligned, and there should be a intervention put in place to help them with whatever that deficit area is. What can be challenging for special educators, especially when, of course, every child's individual plan should be individual and personalized, is that then how do I do that when there's so many, or I'm still trying to figure out where that might be? So to be quite honest, it is a challenge for special educators to make sure that it is very personalized and they understand and they have all of those. In addition, I mentioned that the MTSS is a great asset that also uses the term, and I'm going to tell you, the term intervention can be problematic in schools, because wait a minute, what does that mean if we're talking about an intervention in MTSS, and now I'm also talking about intervention over here? So part of that is not that your staff don't know how to do that. I think it's more around the degree to which they are choosing and selecting appropriate interventions. And if a child has had the certain intervention for a period of time, have they made progress or not made progress? And then where do we go and what do we do? I'll be honest, when I do this work across the state of Illinois, a lot of systems are in that same place. And especially, and I'll just name for myself, I was a classroom teacher. I started teaching in the early 90s. And when this term intervention came into, depending on like how teachers were understood it is confusing, because sometimes it's like, well, doesn't it have to be this? And can it be that? And is this MTSS or is this a special education? And so sometimes it's even, are we doing that full cycle? Do we understand how to adjust interventions as we're giving them and how the students are responding? And when we're talking about students with learning disabilities, you are looking at very prescriptive and discrete ones as well.
This may be more of a question for Eric, but it says students could benefit from extended inclusionary practices, so mainstreaming. What is our current practice?
So I will say that we're in a period of transition in that in some cases in the past, we made the student fit the program, not the program fit the student. And an example of that is we have students who in the past have been relatively self-contained in our lab program, so learning appropriate behaviors. And this year we came together as a team, and we're having those students start their day with a morning meeting with their lab teacher, and then they go out for their core subject areas. Now, and then the program TAs and teaching assistants and the teacher will go into the classroom to help support the students in their core content areas. Now, if the student becomes dysregulated and needs support, they may be pulled back to the classroom to regulate, and then if they can, go back out to class. That is a great example that the team put together this year of making the program fit the student, not the student fit the program, via mainstreaming.
Yeah, it always should be fit the student. You can't make the student necessarily fit the program. I mean, it's just not how they're going to learn.
And if I could just comment, one of the assets of being a larger system, and this has happened, it's my, I think it's 12th or 13th year here. Over time, we have tried to bring programming back from CEDAL because we feel like CEDAL's been a great partner, but frankly, we want some control over our own programming. We want to hire our own teachers. We want to provide our own oversight with the curriculum and instruction. And so as we continue to have opportunities space-wise, it's something we're going to continue to look at. We've made significant strides over the past, I think, 12 years. We have significantly less number of students at our cooperative than we did when I first started in the district. So that's something large districts can do. If you have smaller districts, it's very hard because you may have 3 students with a certain need. That, in terms of cost effectiveness, that can become a challenge, but where we're able, we're always looking to bring programming back.
Other questions?
I still have one more. Can you tell me again what the DD and SLD mean again? It's an acronym for what?
So those are eligibility labels. So DD is developmental delay, which is your youngest children that may have that as an eligibility criteria within what is afforded to students within the state of Illinois. And the second one is significant learning disabilities. And if you take a look, if you look on the bottom of page 21, that shows you the breakdown of, and 20, all of it, of how students are identified within your system, the percent of students and what their specific eligible criteria are for an IEP through what the state offers. So, and those came from the 2020-23 school report card. So I do understand that they may be a little bit dated. I know internally you may have access to some of those, but I wanted to pull publicly available data so that everybody could see where that came from and not be confused where my numbers came from.
So then when you say more is required to support them, is it in terms of resources as far as curriculum, or is it teachers and teaching assistants?
Again, each student would be a little bit different, and that's where the individual comes in. So it has to do with specific students and specifically what they would need. And most especially because if you notice in the middle of that chart, they are your largest identified population. And so in order to make sure that they are moving on a positive trajectory within your system, you're going to want to make sure that whatever those needs are being addressed. And what's challenging about those two eligible criteria is that it could be a very large variety of academic needs and maybe even behavioral needs that these particular students need. And in many cases, that's a lot of problem solving that your building-based staff are going to need to be doing over the length of the time within your programs. So I think that it's something that's still a challenge, and even the staff expressed that they know that's a challenge just because there's just so many variables. Each child is uniquely different. And again, back to that whole thing then, right? So then which intervention? I don't know, I'm constantly trying different ones. So truly, if you have so many students on a caseload, how many different ones are we navigating and managing? Obviously, that's the job, but that's also then where they are asking for more support in that.
Just kind of left, that's why I asked that question. Is it really the teacher's aide ratio? Because again, those individual needs that we address with those students.
And keep in mind, that's going to change annually based on the student, right? So like they may need a one-on-one assistant to this year, but maybe they're going to grow out of that and not need that the next year. So that the truth is that those resources are going to constantly be.
Oh yeah, it's a constant ebb and flow for sure.
Sorry for all the stories, but they are relevant. So last spring, we had 2 students move into the district who are newcomers from Mexico. They had significant vision challenges. And the beauty of the reorganization that Dr. Mendoza did a couple years ago is that special education and multilingual are both under my supervision. And we were able to pull both teams together to meet the language needs and to meet the vision needs and educational needs of those students through both multilingual and special education. So in that case, and really it is student specific, both of those students needed an individual teaching assistant to get through their day. And those were additions that we made. But it really depends on case by case. But more and more, the multilingual department is collaborating with the special education department to meet the needs of our students.
Thank you.
I wanted to jump in really quick too to say this specifically speaks to the support the teachers have through the new curriculum resources. So clearly this was done kind of at the same time or a little bit after all the curriculum adoption processes. But one of the things we really looked for in the curricular resources was particular call outs to support students that may have specific needs, whether it's a language need, whether it was a learning disability, but there's lots of different pieces within the math and the ELA and SLA resources that call these supports out. Now, obviously it's going to require the piece of like training staff to understand how to use those and so on, but that was a big piece that we also heard from our staff last school year, that we need more things to help us with this idea of meeting the needs of intervention and differentiating to meet all the kids' needs. So just wanted to call that out.
Other questions? All right, so let's move on then to the recommendations. So from that, and again, between the trends, this is where we pull in the recommendations. So recommendation 1 is really to ensure that your PK 12 plus program, the programming has consistency and a pathway to least restrictive environment. That's the LRE placement. Now, what I mean by that is ensuring that all staff understand the importance of moving kids to greater independence and pushing them into more rigorous placement options versus, and I will tell you, a lot of times we want to hold them back and protect them. I call it wrap them in bubble wrap to make sure everybody is safe and secure, which yes, we want them to be safe and secure, but we also need to challenge them and actually make sure that they are being, and the reason that it is also a mandate and they should be afforded a free and appropriate public education in a least restrictive environment. Boy, I threw out the special ed jargon there, didn't I? Is to make sure that they have access. And I'm going to tell you, the word access can sometimes be problematic, and staff need to help to understand all of that. They need to access the similar programming as their peers. Let me remind you, I stated this before, but this is really important. Every student in your system is a gen ed student first and foremost. And then they have a plus, they may have disability programming with that, which means that it's really important that as much as possible, your system is moving them into those peer-aligned programming. So to do that, there are many words in the report, but covering specific things that you would see on this slide, things like defining, setting expectations, and broadly communicating those programming across your entire system, ensuring everybody understands that piece. Establishing those clear pathways for various transitions. Now, let me define transition. I don't mean transition as in your program called that. What I mean by is that when students are ready and have shown that they are ready for the next level of rigor programming, that we need to think about that 6, 3, 2 months, couple weeks out, so that we're not just like throwing them into something, but really thinking about that gradual getting them ready, starting to move them out. I know Dr. Apgar already mentioned starting some of those pieces in your lab classrooms, but also thinking about how you're going to transition them between different programs, which could even happen mid-year, right? So we're not just holding kids to one because, well, you know, you're here for the year, but rather how are we really looking at various transitions there? Again, providing professional development on least restrictive environment and program transition planning. I will say that in many cases, that is sometimes a newer concept for school systems. That it's just, how do we do that? Sometimes we do get really rooted in our traditional behaviors and our traditional programming, but how do we really get more flexible in those pieces? And then strengthening and monitoring and evaluating how that program is working. Just because a program works great this year for the students in the cohorts that you're supporting doesn't mean that that's the same program you're going to need in 5 years. So ensuring that these are really not just historical, this is the way we always do our programming, but rather this program really fits the current population of student need that we have in our schools today. Okay, I'll pause. Awesome. Okay, so I'll go to recommendation then number 2. Recommendation 2 is really around enhancing special education instructional rigor. Really taking a look at those specific special education programs and embedding that high leverage instructional rigor for special ed students. As I mentioned, definitely saw a couple of those classrooms that were really just amazing. I mean, you definitely have a lot of staff who can do that. You want to make sure you have that in every single classroom. So making sure that that rigor is there, and that, again, even regardless of the placement, that every student is accessing the highest level rigor possible. That means also then implementing those instructional rigor for also those dually identified multilingual students, ensuring that both of those issues are being addressed at the same time, which I will tell you then will require tightening of those targeted interventions across both MTSS and special education. Just a quick reminder that, again, all students are general ed students first. Every general ed student is afforded interventions through MTSS, and if they have been identified for special education or multilingual supports, those as well. So making sure that everyone has that understanding. Remember, I mentioned that the word intervention can get a little muddled in school sometimes. And so making sure everyone has a clear understanding of that, and that these students, in fact, are really getting the level of intervention that they need. Okay, I'll pause to see if there's any questions there. Okay, so then recommendation number 3, strengthening collaboration and enhancing staff expertise. This came up in some of the challenges around making sure that you really do have those strong communication strands. Now, I'm going to tell you one of the big pieces around communication, and I'm kind of jumping to 3C, is that we need to remember that communication is a two-way process, and that both the sender and the receiver are part of where communication breakdowns can happen. And so while, yes, we identified a couple of your communication breakdowns in the report, I just want to remind everyone that it is everybody's responsibility in communication to make sure that both the sender and the receiver is really part of the enhancing of that, and really listening in both ways. Also, really, you have that strong commitment. I'm going to tell you, I pointed that out purposely, is that I heard repeatedly and I saw repeatedly evidence of just strong dedication to staff. Using that then to really build that coherence, because the truth is you want everyone rowing in the same direction. You can all be really, really strong in terms of dedicated and really here for the kids and really here for the district, but are we all really rowing in the same direction? And I think that's part of one of the challenges in terms of that collaboration piece. And then also providing universal inclusion, professional development for all faculty. One of the things I do want to point out is that when you use the term inclusion, and we're talking about ensuring that all students are together, we also have to remember that sometimes we inadvertently remind our faculty that somehow they're not. And what I mean by that is, if we run an institute day and say, okay, if you're a special ed teacher, you're going to go have your training here, and if you're a gen educator, you're going to have your training here, we're sending messages that there are divisions. That in fact, and so we shouldn't be surprised if gen ed teachers say, well, I'm not a special ed teacher. I don't know what to do. And ironically, they actually do know a lot of what to do. So what I really want to encourage the system to consider is how do we look at the fact that we're not even dividing up our staff to think, I only teach these kids, or these are my kids, not those kids, but really all kids are everyone's student, and we're all here to support every single student. And ideally, you're going to want to have every classroom ready and willing and able to support any type of learner in your system. But it does start with, have we all really participated in that? And I do want to name that in many cases, and this is not the fault of the adults, it's really the way the system runs, some educators haven't had a true understanding of special education or programming in a really long time. And so part of that is just to say, let's be really intentional around that and really name it that way. I think that's where you start to build and strengthen this recommendation for sure. Okay, questions there?
So what I'm hearing is there's a couple things that stuck out. One is sometimes people go above and beyond, and they do Herculean effort, which is great. Unless the only way to bridge the gap is Herculean effort is required, and which is actually a system either under-resourced where it's a system issue. What have you found?
Very true. And I think that there's probably a blend of all of that, including the fact that, and I'm going to make a pretty bold statement here, that you have to start with, has gen ed done everything they could first before we push problems into some other place? Now, I'm going to just say in general that is true across the country. At times, the way that special education programming is looked at I think sometimes systems are too quick to look at to what degree can gen ed do those things. And I'm going to say again, all kids are gen ed kids first. It really is all programming for all kids. And so I think in many cases it does feel that way. And so at times, special ed programming feels like a much heavier lift, and that it does take Herculean efforts to get there because maybe we haven't had enough of that. And if I remember I started by saying one of the strengths you have is a strong MTSS system. Now, the reason why I said that is because that often is a recommendation I do bring forward when that hasn't even sort of started to percolate. MTSS talks about gen ed. Has gen ed done everything it can first? Have we really put in tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 interventions before moving to? And keep in mind that special ed students with learning disabilities or disabilities in general could also have a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 intervention plus an IEP with some goals. At that point, maybe it doesn't take the Herculean effort to get there because maybe we're all working on it together. And again, you're going to have variances across your buildings, across programs, but absolutely, I think when everyone recognizes that we as a full unit are all together and we all need to put in time and effort to support every learner, I think it starts to reduce some of those pieces.
Okay, I'm sorry, you done?
And so the recommendations that you will make or are making are really around enhancing the systems, correct? So it won't be just individually dependent.
Correct. And part of, and I do like to say that in any system, the system itself produces often the outcomes that are predictable. So when a system feels disarray or not understanding things, you're probably going to get some of those outcomes. I will tell you that I've done school improvement for a really long time, and it's usually always a system issue and a communication issue. I mean, those are the two big ones, as you can imagine. And then we put people, humans, in those systems, and then those humans then have to decide how they're going to respond and react. Now, I will tell you, and many times culture can be a big problem too, which is why I said one of your assets is you do have a lot of really dedicated and motivated staff members. I'll tell you, I've not seen that. Sometimes I don't see that. Sometimes I absolutely see staff members who the system has put them in a place where they're done. They're tired. Like, I'm done fighting the good fight, right? Like, that's not your current reality. So that's a huge asset. And then, yes, absolutely, systematic pieces. The more that everyone sees themselves as being part of a unit, back to, again, we don't want to divide our adults. I teach these kids, you teach those kids. Like, nobody wants that. How do we kind of pull that together is also going to help, especially your special educators, feel better about some of that. Nationally, across the country, special education is a tough job to fill because it can be a high burnout because of some of the things that we've talked about, that personalization. Do I understand these pieces? And am I in a system that supports what needs to happen to really get where we need to go with supporting some of our most needy students? Mm-hmm.
So I have a question. Out of the recommendations that you have here, the three, if I go back to those challenges of where you talk about the fracture between central office and buildings, do you think, I'm looking at recommendation number 1, do you feel that really addresses that?
Yeah, I think
I wasn't very confident, just so you know.
yes, and some of where I think some of the challenges in that I think are already in conversations with your staff are already starting to subside a little bit. Keep in mind that the communication gaps and then looking at sort of this disjoint between central office and the buildings has a lot to do with some of that communication. Number one, am I understanding that? Are people fully communicating and receiving and both sending and receiving information in ways? And do we have a clear understanding of the programmatic pieces? And I will tell you, is there flexibility? Is there flexibility in some of those program offerings? Back to what Dr. Epgar was mentioning in terms of like the layup program, already starting some of that. Can we do mid-year transitions? Do we all have that same understanding? And if people don't, then sometimes staff feel as though, I call it like they have this idea that they don't have permission to do that when in fact they haven't even asked the question. And so part of this is, to what degree do we trust each other to have those conversations and really be able to understand what's there? It has to do with the number of times we're actually working with each other in collaboration around what's best in the programming pieces. So I do think that it does address that.
So Eric, I'm going to put you on the spot here with that question. Do you, being in part of that central office, feel and see that fracture between central office and the buildings?
I think so at times. What happens is a lot of times at central office, we're working really hard to like find a placement for a student. We're working really hard to bring in a resource. And we're working really hard in the background. But I think it comes down to that communication piece. The building doesn't always know what we're doing. They don't always know, the resources that we're trying to bring in. On top of the fact that we do need to get the voice of teachers and other staff more often. We can do a better job of that. We started doing that today. I told you the story about, changing the placement of a few students. Well, Christy, Laura, and I brought in that teacher, got her feedback as we were making that decision, and we need to do more of that. We need to communicate better, and we need to give better voice to our staff. So that's my perception from central office.
That started today.
I would say it started before today. As I said before, we're in a period of transition. This entire school year, we've had that mindset, but we still have work to do.
Okay. So this is kind of for both of you, because you kept saying something that really kind of resonated with me. having had a student with an IEP and understanding a parent's frustration and even the staff, you said all kids, hold on, all kids are gen ed students first. And Eric, do you think that's the message we send here to our families and our students?
I think we try very hard to do so. Even Shelley definitely brought that point up during this process, but we've been saying that for a long time. The idea that our students are special education students first, and special education is a service to the general education. So I do, but as a lot of this is pointing out, we need to do a better job of communicating that.
Did you say special education first or gen ed first? Because you said it the
I
opposite.
may have said it wrong. So what I intended
That's
to
why it's
say,
important.
and for a long time, we have said that students who receive special education services are general education students first, and special education services are a service to general education.
I think that's definitely a message probably that needs to be transcended more throughout the building or our district as a whole. But when you said it, I've not really heard that before. And like I said, even having had a student with an IEP, that's not how I felt as a parent.
So as I said, that belief has been present in the district for a long time, but we need to do a better job of articulating that.
I think we do.
I want to thank CEC as the superintendent. So I want to make sure I'm articulating this properly. I was very pleased with the quality of the assessment. It's exactly what we wanted. We can walk around and pat ourselves on the back, or we can kind of get some feedback from subject matter experts regarding how we're doing. You all know, you've seen our special education summative designations. I've worked with CEC before. I didn't actually tell Eric who he should contract with and who he shouldn't, but I really believe we went with the right group. If you review the full report, it's very, very thoughtful, very targeted. They don't really talk around the edges. They're giving us direct feedback. Just also want to remind the board that this is going to be a multi-year process. We won't be able to, making sure that our kids have what they need, regardless of what the need is kind of a never-ending process for us. But definitely we have some of these recommendations. It's going to be part of our resource allocation process. And then it wouldn't surprise me if we decide to bring something back to partner with CEC in our journey to kind of help us along and give us a third eye as we go and make some of these recommended improvements. So just to reiterate what Dr. Epker said on the front end, you should expect some very specific targeted strategies that will be woven in to our strategic plan over a multi-year period of time. And again, I just want to thank CEC. They do a really good job. I remember I've been doing this since the mid-90s too, and they were around. So they have a great reputation, and definitely I feel like there was tremendous value with what we got for what we paid for. So thank you.
I have one parting comment to the board. This is my 11th year in the district and in some iteration of this role. And without fail, you have always supported our students with special needs. So just want to say thank you very much.
Can I ask a question? Eric, and it's for Dr. Apgart, what's one or two things that actually stood out or was new learning from you since you had the assessment?
Microphone.
I would say that, and it's funny that you asked that because they actually played out in a meeting today. It's making sure that we get the voice of our staff, because our administrators work really hard for students who have learning disabilities, but we don't always get the voice of staff. So voice of our staff, making sure that we're finding opportunities to make the program fit the student, not the student fit the program, and like the example that I shared with you. And then a really important piece is communication. We can all work really hard with the efforts we have on behalf of our students, but if we're not communicating and, like Shelley said, rowing together, it's a waste of effort that could be more focused towards the needs of our students.
Scott, I have to jump in super quick and say I was very excited to see the recommendation to enhance the instructional rigor. That's a big piece of our curriculum piece, so I appreciate that, Shelley. Being, all things teaching and learning. I mean, I guess I shouldn't be excited it's there, but it gives me more momentum to keep doing the work that we've already started doing. So I wanted to throw that piece in there too.
Awesome. Thank you. Mr. Kozak. What are we recycling?
So, good evening. Tonight's memo contains the latest list of obsolete technology. It's the same process we follow every time we come up here. The list contains items that have been used beyond useful life and has zero value to the district. We contact our recyclers and they take it off our hands at no cost.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is our disposal list. Any questions? It was in our packet.
I do. So I see we have the sale of the band uniforms.
Yes, we are ready to move forward with disposing of them and selling them.
So is it disposing first or sell, and then what's left we dispose?
Well, I thought we had to put it on the disposal list before we could sell them.
Well, if you're selling first, then we need to know what's left to dispose.
Okay, then we're gonna sell first and then dispose of what's left. Sorry, that was.
We won't know what you're disposing of if you're selling first.
Okay, we're gonna sell first and then dispose.
So the selling, though, what is your timeline? Doesn't give us a timeline and where you're selling to.
We're gonna hopefully start soon as we get the approval to move forward with the selling of it. And then I would have to look at the timeline. I think it's during like football and marching band season. That's the ideal. So end of October, we want to include the end of the season marching band concert that they hold in the main gym. And then from there, we would determine how much is left and then make a determination as to moving forward, what we wanted to do with the rest.
So pretty much this calendar school year.
Yes, that's the idea.
And then you would come back, let us know what you sold and
Correct.
the dollar amount and what is left. And then what is left of that is what you want to dispose. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes.
Okay, so it's really not a disposal list right now because you don't know what you're disposing of if you're selling first.
That must be a misunderstanding for me from last year. I thought we had to have it on the disposal list before we could start selling it.
So when the previous assistant superintendent was here, we had said it's dispose and or sell. So you're selling first. So we don't know really what you're disposing of because your intent is to sell this material to the families.
Yes. Yes.
So you're not disposing it if you're selling it. There's a difference.
Can I just ask, I'm not sure, how do you want it? We'll just do it however you want it. It's the correct memo, correct? We have it in the right place. How do you want it listed in here? Because we don't want to make any assumptions. We want to sell, but we don't have a selling list. So we thought the disposal list was proper. So Ms. McGinley, I know details matter. I just want to make sure we do it the right way. So is there?
I mean, if we're taking district property to sell to the community, which is great, they should always have that opportunity to purchase, a band uniform, a choir robe, whatever it is. That's permission to ask to sell the property, but you're not disposing of it. So this isn't really a disposal, but it's a request to sell district property. It's different than even those that are useful or end of life, like Dan has even when we do the iPads, that comes before the board and we get that data back.
So, but are you saying we're good with it? Should we have a separate memo asking for the board to approve what we want to sell that's not a disposal list?
Yeah, because
Okay,
you're not.
that's all I
you're
want.
You're not
Easy.
disposing this.
Yeah, no problem. I don't.
Understand the request because what happened is you guys were selling it before you even notified the board. That's how this happened, and we're like, wait, how come the board doesn't know we're selling our property?
Okay.
Yeah, no, we all didn't understand, I don't think, because we talked about this
And I know
item
the
extensively.
prior or previous assistant superintendent isn't here, so that's why.
Yeah, so I asked Dr. Rowling before he left, I said, how do we do this? And he said that last year specifically, he added that column on there to make sure. And he said that the disposal, if things were being disposed of, it was more informational versus if it was being sold. Then he added the column on the sheet. So before he left, he copy pasted it over the new sheet. So that's how he said we did it last year. But it doesn't matter. We can do it anyway. No problem.
We didn't really do it last year. It was caught that we were selling district property without permission of the board.
Yeah, no problem. We can do a separate memo and then take it off the disposal list. So I'll just delete the columns that actually say selling and it'll just be disposal.
Can I ask just procedurally, is that under like new business and are you taking action, or is it under communication and it's a discussion?
I think it should just be communication and discussion. I don't think we need to vote on it, but it has to be a communication to the board.
Yep, we're 100% in agreement. We just want to know how you want it executed. So we're clear, right? Okay.
Crystal.
All right.
Okay. Then we had the FOIA report. Any questions? Nope. Okay. Review contracts under 1,000. Any questions on those? Going once, going twice. Okay. So we are now at our favorite part, public comment. Members of the public may participate in public comment during regular board meetings by attending in person or by submitting an electronic public comment form. Please note speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Electric public comments will be accepted until noon on the day of the scheduled regular meeting. The public commenter will be contacted to confirm identity. Once confirmed, the electric public comment will be provided to all board members in written form. Did we have any electronic? Nope, we did not. Do we have any public comment that's here?
Okay, thank you so much for letting me speak. My name is Jesus Rufaldo. I got 2 kids on the district. And first, I would like to congratulate the music department. It was great what they did at the back to school bash. And also the same week, I mean, they went to Elote Fest. It was impressive. And I know the kids, they were so excited too. So that's one of the things that I want to congratulate the teachers, that they did a great job. And actually, I want to put this for Mr. West. I mean, it was great, but now I want to challenge him to also include a couple of songs in Spanish. Let's see how it will improve on Elote Fest. I mean, everybody was so excited about that. So the other thing that I got, I'm going back to be the PTO president from Beach School probably this year. And it will be my last year, so I got a couple ideas that I'm gonna present to whoever shows up to our PTO meetings. And I got a tiny question that maybe some of you can help me out. What is the deal with movie licenses? Do I gotta purchase my own, or do we still got the district one?
So we can have, we'll have one of our, Chrissy, can you respond? Ms. Cacciatore will get to you and tell you exactly how that works.
Great, perfect. And once again, thank you everyone. You guys are doing a great job. The other thing, the dual language is working great for my daughter. Keep up the good work on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any other public comments? Going once, going twice? All right. We are on to the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Board Vice President Larson and Board. Below is a list of recently received donations. We are notifying the board in compliance with board policy. A thank you letter will be sent from the district to each donor. 200 supply-filled backpacks donated by United Way of Lake County for the district newcomer program. Also, an update connected to enrollment projection study. Now that we are settled into the new elementary school configuration, I would like to move forward with commissioning a new enrollment projection study. The last projection study was completed in March of 2021. We will provide additional updates on this plan over the coming months. A couple things just to gently remind the board. The last 2 to 3, we've used a study out of the University of Wisconsin. They've done a really good job. Right now, we are trending above the 5-year projection, so we're not losing as many students as we thought. And the farther out we go, the less accurate the projection study is. So we will bring a recommendation back. It will be vetted through finance, will be shared with the board. We just frankly think that really helps you as a board. It helps us make informed decisions about, I mean, we just talked tonight about special ed programming and those types of things. So it's something that I just think we need to keep current. So I'll bring that back for your consideration and review. That concludes the superintendent's report.
All right, thank you. Time for our Community Engagement Committee update. Mrs. Klingler.
Can't wait, you guys. I'm rusty, so bear with me. Okay. We did have our Community Engagement Committee meeting this evening. It was quite a lot to it, actually. If you guys got a chance to look over it, we went over the communication expectations regarding Remind and Dojo. We did have some questions about who owns the dojo administrative side, and we were informed it was the principals. We had some questions on how long the classes are archived. They weren't sure. They're going to report back to us on that. We asked questions if there are SOPs, so standard operating procedures for dojo, and stressed kind of the need for the importance of continuity in the district. We discussed in particular how like open houses, for example, differ from school to school, and how this could cause confusion to parents and how to connect up with dojo, amongst other things. There are several ways to connect up a parent to dojo, and we reviewed the importance of there being procedures in place for this as well. I don't know if you guys are familiar with dojo at all. If you haven't had like a younger student in, you would kind of need to know the nuances, right? So we actually asked for dojo to be brought before the board, like the full board as a presentation, so you can kind of be fully apprised of how it works and kind of the nuances of it. Similar questions were brought up regarding Remind. Are there SOPs for Remind? Are they consistent across the district? Who oversees the procedures and who holds the staff accountable? Should these procedures not be followed? Many kind of issues have come up, just small ones, but relating to no continuity. We want the expectations set by the district and not by each individual group. So for example, fine arts, athletics, clubs, etc. These SOPs are going to be brought back once they're more established, once they've kind of taken our feedback. Excuse me. And then we'll have more to report on next month on that. Anything you want to add on that? Anything? Okay. Regarding the volunteer handbook, that was the next thing we discussed. We had questions relating to the clarification on the concession stand workers and tutors, as the guidelines were not super clear. The handbook states volunteers must not establish instructional objectives or lesson plans, but then stated that tutoring is part of the volunteering program, so we had kind of some confusion there. It also states that no contact or indirect contact with children would require like a less intense background check, but then it listed concessions under that. So there's going to be some corrections there. We also discussed the option to eventually put maybe like a website button of some sort for parents or shareholders who want to volunteer at different schools, so that we can kind of eventually develop a bench of people who can volunteer. We all know that we have like very consistent parents that volunteer, but we don't want to wear them out. So they really have some good suggestions on that. They really took our feedback, I thought. We again discussed the importance of continuity and having procedures in place to ensure no issues arise. These will be tweaked and then come back to us again at a later date. Anything you want to add on that? Anything? Okay. The next thing we discussed, they had the calendar of events discussion, Board of Education notifications. They wanted feedback on what type of events that we want to be notified about.
And then there was a list included if you guys had a chance to look at it. I actually thought it was quite comprehensive, but if you guys have anything to add, I'm gonna have a conversation with Heather at a later date. But I thought you did a very good job on that, actually. And then if you had a chance to look at the monthly informational snapshot, the info on homecoming will be sent to us in the weekly. So that's really the summation of our community engagement. Any questions? Anything anybody wants to add? Okay, that was it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Right. We'll move on to approval of some meeting minutes. I need a motion to approve the August 19th, 2024 regular board meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Jewett, seconded by Ms. Lee. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Tavera?
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Miss Lee?
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler?
Yes.
Motion carries.
I need a motion to approve the August 26th, 2024 board special meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Jewett, seconded by Mrs. Klingler. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Tavera?
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Miss Lee?
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, for the consent agenda, I need a motion to approve the consent agenda for the following items. The accounts payable report for $2,546,279.18. The September 9th, 2024 employment report.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Jewett, seconded by Ms. Lee. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Tavera?
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Miss Lee?
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler?
Yes.
Motion carries. And on to old business.
Yes. I need a motion to approve the school board policies listed within this memo.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Klingler, seconded by Mr. Jewett. Can I have a roll, or any discussion?
That is listed within the memo. You want me to read them? I can't.
Don't get cheeky, Kevin. Don't get cheeky, Mr. Tavera. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Tavera?
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Miss Lee?
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, new business. I need a motion to approve the Board of Education 2025 COSBA National Conference travel and related expenses estimated to be $11,732.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Klingler, seconded by Mr. Jewett. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Tavera?
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Miss Lee?
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, I need a motion to approve entering into a contract with Milestones Speech and Sped Services LLC to provide a learning behavior specialist to fill the vacant vocational facilitator position at the Transition Center.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Klingler, seconded by Mr. Jewett. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Tavera?
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Miss Lee?
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler?
Yes.
Motion carries. And now we're on to positive occurrences. I think Mrs. Klingler has her hand raised.
Okay, so we had a competition yesterday at the Grays Lake North, and our students in the band won second place in their division and then third all around. And they were so good, you guys. I know I always talk about it, but they were so good. They were so proud of themselves. You should see them on the field, like cheering and having a fit. It was awesome. So I just wanted to highlight it.
I was just going to say, I know we had all the open houses, so I was able to attend all but one, so that's pretty good. But it's, nice to see the families, see the students, talk to the teachers and everything. So they all looked very well attended. So just the start of another school year.
I will second that band field trip to Elote Fest. It was so cool because they marched in. I mean, the only thing I gotta say is it was a little dark, like when they came. So I almost wish like they had a second light for them. But oh, it was so cool. And then like the kids with the flag. I mean, it was awesome. It was a huge crowd and it was really cool.
I would just also add the back to school bash was very successful. I know it's the second year, but I think it's a great event that we have.
For sure. All right. Anybody else? We good? All right. Any future agenda items?
So we kind of talked about this at community engagement. I warned or informed that I would be asking for dojo to be brought forward. And I know I talked to you at an open house because just the things that I had seen in the open houses with dojo, I think it would be beneficial for this board to see how this tool is used within the district.
I agree. It's very cool, and it's been many, many, many years since my children were small enough to be dojo children, and it was very cool when it was back in the day. So
Yeah, and especially since it was on the agenda for community engagement. Where they're being asked to put procedures in place. I think it's beneficial for this board to know.
absolutely. Anything else? Anybody want to say?
I do. I meant to bring it up at community engagement and got distracted. But I was wondering, I'd like to discuss an update on the Panther naming committee that was brought to us in August.
Billy Joe, because then it could be a boy or a girl. All right. Okay, so that brings us. Stop it, you. That brings us to convening in closed session. I need a motion to convene to closed session as permitted by statute 5 ILCS 120/2 for the purpose of discussing the following. 1, employment matters 5 ILCS 120/2C1 and real estate matters 5 ILCS 120/2C5.
So moved.
Second. Motion by Mrs. Klingler, seconded by Mr. Jewett. Can I have a roll call, please? And 14. Flip it over. Closed session minutes. 5 ILCS 120/2C21.
Okay, sorry. So moved.
I'll still second.
Still motioned by Mrs. Klingler and seconded by Mr. Jewett. Can I have a roll call now?
Mr. De Vera,
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley,
Yes.
Mr. Jewett,
Yes.
Mrs. Larson,
Yes.
Miss Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler.
Yes.
Motion carries. And that's all she heard for public. Thank you, everybody. we are back in open session at 10:30. Welcome back, everybody. We're going into action resulting from closed session.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry. I need a motion for the approval of dismissal of probation. I'm going to start over again. I need a motion to approve the dismissal of probationary teacher Risa McElhaney.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Larson, seconded by Ms. Lee. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Tavera?
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Miss Lee?
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Right, we're moving towards closed meeting minutes. I need a motion to approve the August 5th, 2024 closed session meeting minutes of the regular board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Jewett, seconded by Mrs. Klingler. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Tavera?
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Miss Lee?
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler?
Yes.
Motion carries. And that thankfully,
We got more, I'm sorry. I need a motion to approve the August 19th, 2024 closed session regular board meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
motion by Mr. Jewett, seconded by Mrs. Klingler. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Tavera?
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Miss Lee?
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler?
Yes.
Everybody, okay, motion carries.
I need a motion to approve the August 26th, 2024 closed session meeting minutes. Board special.
Second.
I'll read that again. I need a motion to approve the August 26th, 2024 board special meeting closed session minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Jewett, seconded by Mrs. Klingler. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Tavera?
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Miss Lee?
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler?
Yes.
Motion carries, and we are all done passing meeting minutes. And so that brings us to adjournment at, let's call it 10:33 p.m.